This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Welcome to a special edition of the Ankler Podcast. This is Sean McNulty of the Wake Up Newsletter, and I'm joined by Erik Barmack of the Real AI Newsletter, who had a great conversation at the NAB Show with our writer-director David S. Goyer, creator of the series Foundation over at Apple TV, the Blade movies, of course, writer of Batman Begins, and much more. But Erik, the panel was entitled AI, Hollywood, and the Future of Storytelling. So what is the future, Erik? What are you guys getting up to?
Well, the honest answer is we don't know, but what was interesting about the panel is that David S. Goyer's somebody who can get pretty much any meeting he wants in Hollywood. He wrote the Dark Knight trilogy, he worked on the Blade franchise and many other things. And so the question behind the question is, why is David S. Goyer focused on an AI venture when he could succeed in a traditional way in Hollywood?
So what is he up to? What is his company?
Well, it's a bit complex, but he's basically creating a world called Emergence, which is a set of science fiction rules and stories and narratives and characters written by Hugo and Nebula award-winning writers, and then using a new platform called Incention is a tool of governance to let people, thousands of people from around the world, create stories and characters and plot lines in this science fiction universe that he's created.
Interesting. Any perspective? You live in this world, obviously, Erik. Anything catch you off surprise of what you had to say or perspectives, or what kind of raised your eyebrow the most here in the conversation?
That somebody as pedigreed as David wants to create a new world that tens of thousands of people can participate in. You sort of think about Hollywood as being almost aristocratic, that if you're as talented as he is, you're among a dozen people that can do science fiction stories. But David believes that there's more talent to be had around the world using these AI tools.
All right. Well, that sounds like there's also a very lively audience component to this as well, Erik. So let's dive into it. Here's Erik's conversation with David S. Goyer.
First off, I just want to thank the Ankler and Janice for organizing this panel. And it's a real honor to be here today to be talking about emerging technology and how it's affecting Hollywood. I want to add to Janice's background on David. It's an impressive resume, one of the most impressive resumes in Hollywood. A writer on the Dark Knight franchise, writer, director, producer in different forms on the Blade franchise. Worked on Terminator, showrunner on the Foundation series for Apple, has worked in a variety of roles on video game IP, including the Call of Duty franchise and Star Wars franchises. So welcome, David. It's a true honor to have you. Let's start by asking, why are we here? What's with somebody who has a pedigreed resume like this in Hollywood? What is triggering a move into AI for you? What's the big trends been for you?
It wasn't specifically AI, but I will say I've always been tech adjacent or tech interested. And so I sold my first screenplay when I was 21 years old, and it got made as a film when I was 22. So I've been in the business a long, long time. So I was intrigued with the idea of applying some of the lessons that I'd learned in various mediums and seeing what was applicable and what had to be reinvented and different ways of storytelling. And the VR one was incredibly fascinating because we had no idea what we were doing. And for about 4 years, I just went up once a week to Lucasfilm, and I would work with the engineers and we would beta test all of this stuff. And it was exciting and different. And so recently I've been approached, I don't know, over the last 5 years or so by a variety of either blockchain or Web3 or AI companies, all of this sort of new tech to get involved in various ventures. And for a variety of reasons, none of them seemed like the right project, but this particular project seemed interesting enough, and the people behind it I thought were credible. And I'm sort of AI agnostic. I'm not I'm certainly not a proselytizer, but I'm not a doomsayer. I know it's not going away. So I thought, okay, well, this will be interesting to see if I can have just a tiny hand in seeing if it can be directed or if there are actually some applications that might be helpful and not harmful to the creative community.
Now, you had some strong opinions about this. So
Still have strong opinions.
18 months or so ago, you had a statement about the AMPTP. Just for the knowledge of the room, what is the AMPTP and what were your opinions 18 or 19 months ago about AI?
Effectively, they're the studios, the people that make the content. And I think there's been a lot of excitement on their part that we can train all these AI models on the backs of all the creations that we've made, and that they can start, typing in some prompts and just produce movies or animated series and not have actors I think that's their dream.
Is to cut out all creative types.
Cut out all creative types and lower the costs and not to have to pay royalties or, any of that.
Uh-huh.
I think that's initially their dream. And quite rightly, the Writers Guild and SAG and various other places said, hold on, we need to start to legislate that. And I was a member of the Writers Guild board for a while and on some of the negotiation committees. And I think they're realizing, maybe we can't do that, or maybe what's produced this way will be sludge.
Uh-huh.
So I do think some of the euphoria has come down and like how we can cut out human beings in our products. But look, it's an emerging technology that's going to absolutely change not just the entertainment industry, but the way we live. And so this will be more monumental than, Napster or, Spotify or any, and there are ways that we can predict that it will, potentially mess things up. Also ways that I think it can be beneficial. And then there are lots of ways that we don't know what the applications will be yet because they haven't been invented yet. We have to see what the applications will be. So I find it both scary and exciting.
Now, for those who've read our AI column on the Ankler, been pretty positive on a lot of the trends in AI and think these are real tools that people can be used. But lately, I've been a little bit more that this is an existential threat and a real challenge to the creative industry. I want to show some slides of images that I took using ChatGPT's latest image modeling 4.0. And I want your reaction to this. So this is my daughter, Penny, 4 years old. She's jumping around at UCLA. Let's go to the next slide. What does this remind you of? This is
Miyazaki.
Miyazaki. He's the head of Studio Ghibli, who's done some of the most beautiful movies in the world. Some of his scenes, a 4-second scene by Miyazaki, will take 1.5 years to make.
Yeah.
This was done in 10 seconds. Let's go to the next slide. This is Pixar rendering of Penny. And let's go to the next slide. This is Lego. All of these things were done in less than 30 seconds. What's your reaction to that? How does that make you feel?
If I can take my moral hat off.
I want the moral hat, though.
No, I will. Technologically, I think it's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But look, it's obviously terrifying because, Lego is owned. In the case of Miyazaki, he's got a very specific style of animation that he's developed and curated over decades and decades. And to a degree, this is called scraping. This is where the various people that are making AIs, some are purportedly only using public domain, images and videos to train their AI models. But I don't think anyone believes that's the case, right? I think almost everyone believes, cynically and rightfully so, that they're illegally scraping all the stuff that is copyrighted and trademarked. And so the obvious problem here is you're going to get into with Miyazaki, who's horrified by this. He didn't give them ChatGPT permission to train their AI model on his works. The one thing that gives me hope here is that Lego, for instance, or Pixar, they're represented by big corporations.
Yeah.
And they don't want to be ripped off either.
Yeah.
So that gives me a little bit of hope. But I think if we can move to a future where, let's say in the case of Miyazaki, for whatever reason, he's agreed to license his material to an AI, a large language model, to be trained. and there's an agreement and he's getting compensation, that's one thing, which is a little bit what the project that I'm working on is attempting to do an end run around.
So David, let's talk about the project. So let's talk about Incention and what you're going to be doing with Emergence.
Okay. So basically over the last 5 years or so, I've heard different entities talking about, can we use technology to, the phrase you hear a lot is democratize Hollywood. So right now, the way that a lot of these franchises are made, most of them are legacy franchises. So they're made by these studios that have been around for 50 years or 100 years. And, whether it's Batman or whatnot, I'll give you a perfect example. When Chris Nolan and I did Batman Begins, initially, we only dealt with one executive at Warner Brothers, Jeff Robinov, who was the head of movies at the time.
Probably that way today, too.
Oh, no. So when Batman Begins was a success and we were developing The Dark Knight, we had a kickoff meeting, I remember, and it was in this big conference room, and there's something like 25 or 30 executives. There's all these stakeholders in these different silos at the company now that, had their own needs and their own opinions about what we should be doing for the next Batman movie. And that's just not a good way to tell a story, is by consensus, is by, 20 or 30 different people, it's death by 1,000 cuts. Fortunately, with someone like Chris Nolan, we had the power to just say, no, we're not going to listen to any of that. But that is how most of the big movies and TV shows get made these days.
And that's with tremendous success. That's with Nolan on Batman. So
yeah, but I'm saying, but almost all of these movies, good or bad, get made this way.
Yeah.
And if you achieve a level of success as a TV showrunner or a film director where you can kind of stave off the mob, then you've got a chance of, getting something made that has some kind of authorship, that's not slush. But there's a lot of movies and TV shows that are made now, and I won't name them, but you can probably think of them that you can tell are, were made in a sausage factory. It stifles innovation. If I'm a big legacy media company and I want to refresh Batman or I want to refresh Lego, that's not the way to do it, right? It's a miracle to me that Barbie got made the way it was. And that was clearly Greta Gerwig's vision, but that's the exception to the rule these days. And it's obvious to me that that's why it worked, was because it had a point of view. So on the one hand, being an old timer now in the studio system, when I started out, you would have one or two people that would say, yeah, this is cool. And there were people that genuinely liked movies. Let's make it. When Mike DeLuca, who's now running Warner Brothers, was running New Line, when I did Blade, he just said, I like it. And they had run all these profit and losses statements on potentially what it would do. And he said, I don't care. I want to make it. So that was it. So tell us how the AI would bring us back to that state. So this isn't specifically AI. We're not an AI company. We're employing new technology. AI is a component of it. So the flip side is I was working on a big TV show and we were talking about doing some merchandise for the show, T-shirts, coffee mugs, whatever. And the studio, their merchandise department presented all this potential merchandise and it was bad. Uh-huh. And I was on a big Zoom and I said, hold on, I need a screen share. And I went over to Etsy where there's a ton of unauthorized merchandise because it's a well-known property. And the merchandise that the people were making on Etsy was way better than the merchandise that this big legacy studio is making. And I said, let's just make a deal with the top 10 of these creators and use their merchandise. And their legal department said there's just no mechanism to do that. Yeah. So that's where this came from. We started to think about, well, what if there were a mechanism to do that? What if we could create a platform, and Emergence is the use case for it, where let's say I had a piece of IP. I could go on to Incention and Story, which are the two pieces of technology that this is built on. I can register my IP. I can set the parameters of what I want done with that IP. I can be an individual. I can be a corporation. No pornography. Or here, you must use this style guide. And then instead of all these creators on Etsy who don't have $100,000 to hire a lawyer to create a licensing agreement, it's all built into the technology. It's just a couple of clicks. The licensing agreement is set. If I'm a creator and I want to make, this is a character called Captain Scotty, a t-shirt, a mug, or whatever, I do it. I click. We might even provide you with the links to create the t-shirt. It tracks everything. It kicks me, the creator, back a tiny bit, 2%, 98%, goes back to the creator of the t-shirt and off you go. And the creator of the t-shirt didn't have to hire, create a licensing agreement or a lawyer. So that's one way that it works.
Got it. So Incention and Story are the tech platform.
The backbone of this. It's on blockchain. It tracks everything. It keeps track of the payments. But more importantly, it kind of watermarks on the blockchain that IP forever.
And then Emergence is the world that you've created that other people can participate in.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the AI helps with the navigation of the rules.
Yeah. So Story and Incention wanted a use case to show how this would work. So I wrote a 25-page Bible. We hired a bunch of artists. We hired some Hugo and a Nebula Award-winning science fiction authors to write stories based on the Bible, artists to create characters based on the Bible. And then we ethically trained a large language model with all of the assets that we had created and compensated people for.
And so when you say ethical, that I assume it means you're not scraping the internet.
We only trained the model based on these assets.
Okay, great.
And on top of it, we gave the writers and creators like a little piece of the company as well. So we paid them for their efforts, but we gave them a piece of the company. So in success, it could scale up. And so then the idea is if you go to our website, emergenceuniverse.com, initially we created an AI. And if you don't want to read the Bible, go through the trove of stuff, you can just ask the AI called Atlas questions about the various characters of the various worlds.
And is Atlas learning the way that you thought it would learn?
Yeah, because initially right now, again, it's based on the lore. And then right now we're sort of in the beta stage. People can also create new characters based on the style guide of what it has learned and mint them. And that's their own character. And then eventually what's going to happen is as creators on the website write their own stories or create their own artwork, that will initially be considered lore. And then what will happen is people will vote and then there will be an editorial board and some of that will go back upstream and become canon. It's part of the Bible lore, and our website or our system will track their contributions and their attributions and compensate them. So that's the dream.
You've worked with huge IP that take decades to, Marvel took 50 years to be fully released. How do you accelerate that? Like, how do you become a platform that users want to contribute to?
Well, that's what we're hoping to do, right? On one hand, I'm thinking this is sort of like the yogurt starter. Hopefully right now we've got about 100,000 creators who joined the website.
100,000?
Yeah, they're starting
big number.
Yeah, they're starting to contribute. But again, we're only in the beta stage. And so right now we're developing an audio podcast and we're going to allow some of those creators to create characters that will appear in the audio podcast, be compensated for that creation. We're also putting together some comic books. So the plan is audio podcast, comic books, maybe eventually go into animated series, maybe eventually live action. What I tried to do was, again, create a Bible that was built to be built upon. So it's kind of like an open sandbox. So I created, a background story, some background characters, background places, but with a lot of unanswered questions. So I'm hoping that the community that we build around this will help answering those questions. And in answering them, they will get attribution and they will be compensated for their contributions. So this, as opposed to something like that I created from whole cloth, this was something that was built to be built upon. So what we started doing was also using the community to beta test some of this stuff. So we auditioned 3 voice actors to play that woman, Scotty. And then we said, which one do you like? And so we've already been using the community to kind of beta test our ideas. And as we go into this narrative podcast, we use the community to help us determine which character we should focus on. Things like that.
Now, just listening to you, you're one of the few people that I've met in Hollywood that's also talking the language of our friends up north in Silicon Valley and the tech world. And you have investments from Mark Andreessen and other fairly high profile people in technology. And you're also one of the few people that could get meetings in most of the major studios. And how do those worlds work together? Is it hard to bridge?
Right now, they don't.
Yeah. So what are your conversations like when you're talking to somebody who's part of Mark Andreessen's team versus somebody that's part of Bob Iger's team?
Look, right now, my perception is there's a real divide, right? There's a bunch of incredibly smart people, at A16Z and, one of the venture capital firms that's invested in our companies. But they don't know how things are created necessarily. And I think there's an assumption that, it's relatively easy, or that you can, it's much harder than people realize to create something sticky, to create something that a mainstream audience is going to want to like. And almost always the things that are really successful are things that have been funneled through a narrow creative vision, right? That have a point of view. On the Hollywood side, everyone's in their own silos. And so I think there are very few people right now that are conversant in both sides of the technology. And it's been interesting because as we've launched this in our beta test, I've been contacted by a variety of heads of studios who've said, what the hell is it? And what's interesting on their side is once I explain what it is, they're like, God, I wish there were a way that we could cut through the red tape and innovate on our side as well. But there are all these ways that we can't do that. I could name some of the people that called me that I had some very frank conversations with. And they're all people that you would know. And it's not that they don't get it. It's not that they're not frustrated with the way that some of these movies and TV shows are being made, but they're just sort of paralyzed with how do I cut through the red tape? How do I, God forbid, we take character X and we let some people, iterate on it and it damages the brand. And so they want to innovate. So one of the things that we're talking about doing now is with some of these bigger corporations or universes is saying, okay, is there a secondary or tertiary character that you're willing to try to license on this platform and see if we can innovate and come up with something interesting that maybe, you wouldn't have been able to do with, your legacy corporation. So we'll see what happens.
This episode is brought to you by Honda. Introducing the all-new, all-terrain Honda Passport Trail Sport, the most off-road capable Honda Passport Honda has ever dreamt up. The Passport features increased ground clearance, roof rails on all trims, and available specially developed all-terrain tires. And you'll stay comfortable with tri-zone climate control and available features like heated and ventilated front seats and a panoramic moonroof. Learn more at honda.com/passport.
Canva presents your work horoscope for this week. Deadlines are in retrograde, which we all know can bring some intense energy. Our advice: fend off this forecast with Canva. Like Canva whiteboards to counter creative blocks, and Canva docs for clarity in communications. If you have any sales deals coming through, results will be in your favor with Canva presentations. Manifesting many wins for you. It's a great week to love your work at canva.com.
So you look at the market cap of big tech and then you compare it to the size of the studios. And then when I listen to you talk about the studio heads feeling stuck, it makes me feel like Hollywood's a bit hopeless.
I wouldn't say it's doomed. It's in a bad place right now for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think it's pandemic, streaming, it's technology, it's the digital native generation only watching things on their phones and their iPads and watching YouTube. I've got 3 kids watching YouTube over anything else. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be a need for stories. I mean, there always will be. So it's going to have to evolve into something. And people don't want to watch just a sludge. I mean, there's a certain percentage of the audience that will watch sludge, but a lot of people want to be moved. And it's interesting to me that if you look back over the last 20 years, a lot of the really big hits came out of nowhere. You know, people would not have predicted at the time that Game of Thrones would have become the thing it was. It was too many characters. It was too dark. It was too hard to follow. It was blah, 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 blah. And yet it became this massive thing. Or Stranger Things, which was passed on by almost every studio in town. I mean, the big hits almost always come from things like that, things out of left field.
What does success look like for Incention 10 years from now? Is it like a studio, or what is it? Is it like a user generated platform? How would you describe it in your ideal world 10 years from now?
I was a kid growing up reading comic books.
Mm-hmm.
You were a kid. When I was a kid reading Marvel comics, I would write letters into the editor. And the best you could hope for when I was a kid was that maybe your letter would be printed in the letters page of a comic book, or if you drew a sketch, it might be printed. But there was no mechanism for an idea that you had or a character that you created to ever join the Marvel universe. There was just no mechanism for that. It would be interesting if there were a way for that to happen. So that's what we're trying to dip our toe into. Is like, what if there were a way that right now there's all this fan fiction. There's tons of Star Wars fan fiction or Harry Potter or whatever. Just tons and tons of whole websites of fan fiction. But there's no way for any of that to swim upstream and become canon and become official. I started out coming up with ideas for Marvel Comics and sending in goofy characters and hoping that they would have this character fight Spider-Man. And, you know, of course, none of that ever happened until I joined Hollywood, and then I could do it. But if there were a way for that to happen, and there were a way for people at home to be compensated and for their creation to be correctly attributed to them and then tracked, you know, and even if it were like, fine, I created this character and joined the MCU and I'm going to get whatever it is, $10 every time the character shows up, but the character shows up 1,000 times or whatever it is. I mean, that would be, I think, a really interesting way to subvert the creative paradigm. So success would be if Emergence can be self-sustaining to a certain extent. And then if we can entice other creators to join the platform and log their IP onto it, and they can start to see success from that.
Yeah.
It's hard because what we're trying to do really hasn't been done before.
Yeah. Back to the big heck of it all, when you're talking about the Etsy example. So my kids, who are 8 and 9 and should not be watching Squid Games, but are doing mashups of Squid Games videos and buying stuff that Netflix does not participate on. There's a whole ecosystem for 8 and 9-year-olds to make things with Squid Games. And it's done largely through ChatGPT, mashups, and Roblox. Take your pick. How do you think about that?
Well, let's take Squid Games just as an example.
Yeah.
I mean, potentially, you know, Netflix could put Squid Games on the Incention Story platform and allow it to be legally mashed up and remixed. And the creators that are making that aren't being sued. It's not whack-a-mole where they're getting cease and desist letters. And the creators that are making that stuff are getting, 80, 90% of the money.
So you're going back to the start of the conversation. The idea of ethical AI, ethical platforms is also a business case that you're going to be able to control the outcome.
Well, I have no idea if we can control the outcome. I mean, who knows if this is going to work, but at least we're giving it a try.
Yeah. Great. Does anybody have questions? Like, gentleman up in the front.
Hi. This is fabulous, and thank you for coming up with such a brilliant idea to give us buy-in. But how do you not become Spotify down the road, particularly when you've grown enough subscriptions or users and it's exit strategy time? This sounds like the Spotify story, and we're excited about it. But how do you resist the temptation to become a platform that is predatory to the people caught up in it, particularly as you go down the road in maturity?
Look, this is a fair question and probably above my pay grade. But as we roll out the mechanisms for the way the Incention platform is going to work, I suppose the difference between something like Spotify and what we're attempting to do is that when you log onto this platform as the creator, you set the terms. The platform gets a tiny, tiny fraction, less than 0.5% or something like that to help track it. But you set the terms. You decide as a creator how much of the profit you want. The terms can be as narrow as you want. You can say you can make t-shirts and it has to follow this style guide and it has to be these 3 colors. And as a creator of it, I get 90% and you get 10%, or it can be the opposite.
It's a fair question. It also assumes that TV and film won't be the Wild West of it. I think the ability to control how IP is distributed is getting harder, not easier.
Well, that's the other thing is like, it's unclear to me right now, also because these legacy studios move so slowly. It's unclear to me that look what happened with the streaming wars. Like already it was going to be like, oh, we're just going to create our own projects and our own streamers and we're not going to license our material to anyone else. And 5 years later, that's completely gone out the window and the whole business model has changed. It's not clear to me that the business model for distributing this material isn't going to change 3 times over in the next 15 years and that there won't be something else that will upset it, whether it be a YouTube or a Roblox or anything else.
Another question up front.
That's why I said up front, so you can see my hand. 3 weeks ago, I was at Anime Japan, and they had a bunch of the voice actors up on stage, and there's 100,000 people there trying to take pictures. And they got these people with signs saying, no pictures, no this, no that. In my mind, I'm thinking, you guys are crazy. You have all this, earned media here, ready to put this stuff on YouTube, Instagram, and you're saying no. 3 days later, Ghibli happens, right? I'm thinking, oh, maybe they have a point. Now today, the pendulum is going back and you seem to have, a potential solution for this. However, my question is, how do you convince creators that this is the way to go, right? Because creators are, again, the root of the story. This is the trick, right? Because here's this pendulum. One day it goes like this, it goes back, it goes this, it goes back. How do you get them to move on to, where we're going as opposed to where it has been?
Again, really good question, because this is all fine and dandy, but it doesn't work if we don't get creators to, sign up with us and try it. So that's why in the case of Emergence, we created this use case, right? That's why I think they were smart enough to say we need to link arms with the creator at the beginning to help us develop this, because my job was not just to create the Bible, but to be the advocate for creators in general, as we would talk about this. And I would say, well, from a creator standpoint, this is what I would want. So again, I don't run the company, but I'm a stakeholder and I'm the creative consultant for the company. What we're hoping to do is use Emergence as a use case. And that will only work in the case of Emergence if we can allow other people to contribute and give examples of how those contributions were attributed and compensated. So the proof will be in the pudding over the next couple of years. And I think if other people see that and other people in the community raise their hand and say, yeah, I created this character, I created this planet, and I got X amount of money, or I made these t-shirts from this and I got X amount of money, hopefully that's why I call it the yogurt starter.
David's also being modest. Like if you're trying to start a new platform and you're a 19-year-old writer, do you want to be on a generic platform or do you want to be involved in a story with the guy who worked on Batman? It reminds me of how United Artists got started a century plus ago. It's like that was Hollywood changing again away from a very rigorous studio model to an artist friendly model. And it helps to have Charlie Chaplin or whomever. So having people at the front who are very talented industry leaders has to make a difference.
I hope so. But look, I don't have to do this. I could just do what I've been doing. But what I've been doing has also been frustrating sometimes and boring sometimes. And I'm interested in disruption and new models and new platforms. So I demurred and I didn't get involved with 4 or 5 other projects that came my way. But this one seemed, and again, I don't know if this will work, but I think it's an interesting idea. And I like the people involved and they've been good partners and good listeners. But your question is a totally valid one, is how do we get other people to sign up? And so that's what we're hoping to do with Emergence, is show this use case. And it's probably going to take a few years.
Great. Up here.
Hi. So I'm the vice president for a film school back in India. And I just want to ask you, so how are you looking at the globalization of this? Because just seeing this, I can see tremendous opportunity where creators from across the world will want to take the core of what you've created and then build out culturally rooted narrative, culturally rooted visuals from in different regions of the world. And that just takes it to a whole other medium where you could actually have a different IP here and different IP here, there, with both equally monetizable.
Sure.
1.4 billion people there and I don't know how many million creators. So like our kids, our students would love to take swings at this. So how are you looking at taking this global? Because then it would need significant expansion and bandwidth at the platform end to evaluate all these things that are coming in.
Okay, so that's a multi-pronged question. I'll try to nutshell it. At the end of the day, what we're trying to build is the platform or the pipeline that can be used in dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of different use cases. Another example would be you're starting to see some of these creators on TikTok or Instagram that I think are doing actually some pretty interesting things with AI. They clearly have a point of view, and they're creators that I follow. So I've already seen cases where those creators' creations have been ripped off by other Instagram users or other, TikTokers. And so what they could do is they could put their material on our platform, register it on the blockchain. They could make deals too if they wanted to have that be licensed out to train other AI models that they want. But also one of the things that would happen is there would in effect be a watermark. So there would be a way to track their creations and potentially go after people that were ripping them off. But there's lots of different ways that this could work.
David, one answer is that Hollywood's a bit of an aristocracy and it's hard to get in unless you're very, very well connected and spend time here. And so projects like this can democratize because it's the idea that wins, right? And so somebody could contribute from Mumbai or Delhi and still have a chance of being.
Well, that's exactly it. So someone at any place in the world who's just like an artist, right, could say, fine, I want to design a t-shirt. We will even link them to t-shirt makers. Right. And, wherever they are in the world, or they're going to be someone on Etsy, right? I'm going to make mouse pads or I'm going to make coffee mugs or something like that with this character. Great. It's official. It's licensed. It's all taken care of through the blockchain. You can just be sitting in your home in Mumbai and do it. And the platform will track the payment back to the original creator of, Emergence. The platform will take a tiny piece, 0.5% or something like that. But it's right now, if you create a game on Roblox, the terms are pretty onerous. I think Roblox takes 60% or something like that. A lot. Yeah. We're talking about taking 0.5%.
It's a scale business.
Yeah.
2 quick questions.
Mr. Goyer, this is more of the ethical AI question. I just curious on your opinion. So, a few months ago, I think it was Hollywood Reporter, Variety, did that article where they looked at the data set of the original models and they saw something like 53,000 movie scripts or something like that. But what was interesting, reportedly, it's shown that those scripts were actually just the dialogue transcripts from the captions. And so someone like myself who's influenced by you, Jeremy Saulnier, the Simon Kinbergs of the world, my first reaction was that, the good stuff is really how y'all's relationship between your narration style, your very imaginative but succinct way to carry the story through, and your dialogue. So I'm just kind of curious, what was your first thought when you saw that from your perspective?
How do you feel about getting scraped?
Well, obviously I don't like being scraped, but I will say we're a long way away from, do I think AI can completely make a movie? Yes. Or write a script? Yes, obviously. But do I think they can make a good movie that, that audiences will be sustained by and keep coming back to again and again? No, I don't think they can. I mean, here's what my hope is A, we will fairly quickly move to a place, and people are working on this right now, where if something has been generated by AI, period, you can tell. So it's a watermark. Or another version is, maybe there's a way to embed a watermark in something so that an AI can't scrape it. I mean, there's people are talking about different versions of this, right?
Right. Where I get worried is it's too late because it's already been scraped.
It might be too late.
It's already been scraped.
It might be scraped, but even now though, like for instance, like I've experimented with both like the image generators and the various, text ones. And so we were curious the last season of Foundation, which is a show I do for Apple. We had to write a script. It was fucking awful. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was terrible. It didn't even make any sense. And it was even a script based on the outline that we'd written, and it was fucking awful. We've added great scenes. It was gibberish. It didn't work. But one of the things I have used it for is I've written a scene, like a 3-page scene, like a big long monologue. And I was curious to say, okay, so I wrote this. I don't want to spend 2 hours or 3 hours figuring out how I can make this a page instead of 3 pages. So I'm going to feed my script into it, my 3 pages, and say, can you summarize this? Give me 6 different summaries. And I was like, oh, it works. That was interesting. Okay, I'll pull that from that and that from that. And then 5 minutes later, I had it. So there are definitely use cases that were helping me as a creator.
David, you're contributing to our robot overlords overtaking us at some point. Let's do one more question right there in the back.
And before the question, I just want to say one other thing. I'm of the mind that I've said it again and again, like, do I think this is going to work? I have no idea, right? Yeah. But I'm of the mind, I decided what changed since I made that statement. I still think there's a potential for a doomsday scenario. What changed is I just decided it's not going away. So I can take, in a small way, I can take part in it.
Right.
And see if I can build some guardrails or build some use cases that aid the creator, or I can just stick my head in the sand.
You're not an ostrich.
So anyway, last question.
What protections would you have against potential bad actors, like within the community?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Look, it's a really good question. And all we can do, we sit around and we think about what are ways that people could be bad actors and how do we prevent that? Inevitably, there will be bad actions that we will not have thought of. I mean, that's just the way all of this works. I mean, they said, Bitcoin couldn't be hacked and Bitcoin was hacked. I mean, so you sit there and you try to think of like, these are the ways that it might be misused. I mean, we put guardrails in for, pornography or hate speech or things like that. There will be bad actors. There's no way to stop it. We just have to be as proactive as we can and as open as we can and just not let the AI run it. And, suddenly we're all on Skynet.
Magnified. David, thank you for joining us. This is a true honor. It was exciting to have you, exciting to the Ankler, to having both of us. Thank you.